friends, and welcome to the School Librarian Learning Network podcast. I'm Steve Tatro, also known as Dr. T Loves Books, and I love talking about all things related to school libraries. I may be an old dog, but I'm always trying to learn new tricks. In each episode of the SLLN podcast, I'll chat with a school librarian about a lesson they love. Hopefully, this can be a place for school librarians to get ideas and find new ways to engage with their students and staff. As a good friend likes to say, we're better together. So I hope this podcast will help school librarians connect with and learn from each other. The opinions and ideas shared in this podcast by myself and my guests are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. And because school librarians always strive to be good digital citizens, I cite sources when using material that is not my own. Without further ado, let's get to this week's episode. Hey everybody, we're back, and I am so excited that we're going to get to talk to Melissa Corey this week. She is such an amazing sharer of so many things, and she's going to share a lesson with us, and I am so glad to have her here. So Melissa, thank you. I cannot thank you enough. I know it's a hectic time of year, so I really appreciate you taking the time. Just in case there are people out there who don't know who you are, which I would find difficult to believe, but just in case, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, where you are?
So my name is Melissa Corey. I am a middle school librarian from St. Joseph, Missouri. I have been a librarian for 15 years now, all in the same school district. We're a town of about 75,000 individuals, and my school is grades 6 through 8, 400 kiddos, 50 plus staff members. I don't know who needs me more most days, the students or the staff. And I do share a lot online. I share a lot of resources and especially templates of everything that I create. So I'm really excited to share this particular lesson today.
Yeah. And I'm just kind of curious. So you've been in school librarianship for a while now. How did you end up in the school library? What was your path?
Oh my gosh. So my path was actually, I went to school to be a social studies teacher. I had a really great mentor, Mr. Luce, who was my high school social studies teacher and Scholar Bowl coach. I actually do hold a Scholar Bowl record in Missouri that still stands to this day.
Wow.
So I know, just a little piece of trivia. But I really, I wanted to follow in his footsteps. I graduated college at a time when we were kind of in a recession. I don't want to age myself too much, but like mid 2000s, basically there were not as many positions available, and a lot of them were tied to coaching different activities that I was not qualified to do. So I decided to go to graduate school. I had a great mentor in college that encouraged me to go to grad school, kind of outlined some options, and my ears perked up when library science was one of those. So went back to school, obviously had my teaching certificate. So it was really a natural fit to go into school librarianship after grad school.
And I mean, social studies teacher, really, I can see how that interest and background has sort of led us maybe into this lesson that we're going to be talking about today. So
yeah, definitely.
So what is sort of the backstory of this lesson? How did this come about?
Yeah, so I have a great social studies department that I work with. We actually have 2 district teachers of the year in a 3-person social studies department. The third person is obviously qualified, for that. Not that they're left; they're still a bit newer to the profession. So I work with a really great department, and I collaborate with social studies a lot. And Missouri actually passed, as of this school year, we have a law that our legislature passed called the Missouri Holocaust Education and Awareness Act, which it requires a lesson. Really, it's up to the schools how to, fulfill that particular requirement, but it requires a lesson as part of Holocaust awareness during the month of April. So I collaborated really closely with one of our 7th grade social studies teachers, Miss Sandstone. And she and I, we actually do a museum in the fall for September 11th. And so we have like this memorial, this exhibit in our library, and all the kids tour it. And it's a multimedia, different experiences that they're having to gain that background knowledge, but also to bring that kind of museum level experience to our students. We're a Title I school. A lot of our students can't even make it to the museums in, our closest metro area is Kansas City. So we want to bring that experience to them. And so she was actually sitting in professional development last fall, whereas a district level department, they were talking about this new act, and she, sent me a message and said, could we create a Holocaust Memorial Museum, a Holocaust Memorial exhibit? And I said, absolutely. And so it took us a few months to come up with all the pieces, and it really came together very well.
That's amazing that you were able to go in that short of a span of time and put this together, because it really looks amazing, I have to say. You guys did a great job.
Yeah, thank you. Well, and we actually had a little bit of community assistance with it as well. So we had an organization. So for one of the pieces of the lesson, we wanted to have something at scale so that we could depict, visually for our students the number of victims of the Holocaust. And so our first thought was shoes, because at the National Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., that's a big piece of that museum.
Yeah, that's an amazing, that museum itself is amazing, but that display really helps you to sort of contextualize what some of these numbers really are. And it's simple, but it's so powerful.
Yeah. And that was something, we talked about like paper clips. There's a great documentary. And I actually used that when I student taught in history to teach the Holocaust. I used that, and I used Mouse by Art Spiegelman. And so I kind of had, a lot of background knowledge of teaching that anyway, but shoes was, again, the first thing that came to mind. So we had a group, our AFL-CIO has basically a thrift store or a free store for clothing. And they loaned us quite a few pairs of shoes, of that style, that kind of older, old-fashioned style for that exhibit. So we were able to scale, that for our students and say each individual shoe represents, in this case, 50,000 victims of the Holocaust. So, more than, what they would normally be able to visualize. And so now that we've done it at least 1 year, we're hoping the next year we have more and more shoes. And our staff also donated some shoes just temporarily. So that was one thing that we had to work through logistically, was how do we keep track of all these shoes? Whose shoes? So even, just things like that, brainstorming, how do we label them temporarily? So we stuck a note inside each one so we knew where to return them to, who they belong to. One of our teachers, I didn't even ask for children's shoes. And one of our teachers has 3 kids under 5. And so she donated children's shoes and baby shoes.
Wow.
And that stopped kids in their tracks, because they know, they read a lot of, before the exhibit, they read a lot of survivor stories and stories of different victims. But being able to visually see that in front of you was a really powerful experience for them.
Yeah, sometimes that moment it's a simple moment, but it's a grounding moment that really can bring a lot of this theoretical knowledge to a very personal level.
Yeah, and even, a technique from filmmaking. So the movie Schindler's List, there's a one piece of color in that entire movie is the red coat.
Yeah.
So the little girl, you see her walking, I think, through the ghetto at some point after Warsaw's been cleared out. And then you see the coat in a pile later in a wagon of clothing of the victims. So we didn't really get, a lot of wild colored shoes, colorful shoes, but I have a pair of pink flats, basically, really bright colored. And so those were front and center so that the kids see the color, it's not just, different drab, older styles of shoes. It's this is a real person, had real items of clothing that they appreciated and had to give away.
Wow, I really appreciate those levels of detail that you brought to this, because it would be really easy to just say, here's a big pile of shoes, but there's nuance to this that you're really bringing to the kids, I think, in a really powerful way. I'm sure.
Yeah. And I'm particular about every single thing that I do. So I had them all in wooden crates. I have some crates I use for displays. And some will look like they'd just been discarded. And then some were arranged like they were coming back to put the shoes on, that they didn't know that would be the last time they wore that pair of shoes. So,
wow.
Yeah. So really just that level of detail kind of helped bring that to life for our students.
It's interesting. I don't usually think of the library as a museum space. In fact, I often find myself saying to people your library is not a museum. You shouldn't be keeping every single thing in it. And yet, this is such an interesting, different way to use that space and to, I mean, what a great collaboration and a great use of that space for something that's really going to stand out for the students.
Yeah, we've done the September 11 exhibit. We actually have a student created museum that we do every February as well. So we celebrate Black History Month, and we have students create banners. They pick one individual that they feel was influential in Black history here in America, and they create a banner. And so a few years, when we're able to get the equipment for it, we have like the art show. I'm not even sure what to call them. They're not risers, that art show displays. When they're available in our district in February, which there's a lot of events going on, we create a student created museum out of all of their banners, which is a nice way for them to see that they can be a part of history as well. You know, the things that they create and really are curating through their research are, you know, able to end up in a space like that as well. So it really, again, it's a lot of prep work. My counselor took a picture of me that day on a ladder, still, you know, hanging things up from the ceiling. And it really came together very, very well, though. It's visually, it really had a big impact.
I imagine, man, I'm trying to think about like, how do you store all this stuff? Like you must have a decent size closet or cubby or shed or something.
No, I don't. So I have, I don't have a workroom anymore.
I know that feeling.
So I have two cabinets, like two tall cabinets. So what is nice though, so a few other elements, I have one file cabinet as well, a 2-drawer file cabinet. So I actually did
fancy.
Yeah,
2 whole drawers.
2 whole drawers. I try to be, I'm kind of a minimal hoarder. So I like try and keep what I need to keep, but I always realize, you know, I can remake things if I need to, but we're really lucky in that we have a print shop in our district that will do jobs at pretty large scale, not only by like quantity, but also by size. So a couple other components I had in the exhibit were the set of, there's lots of different sets from the National Holocaust Memorial Museum of posters, educational posters. And so I had those printed through our print shop. So I have those stored in a cabinet for next year. I think I printed 3 individual sets. I did, you know, evaluate which ones I felt were relevant to middle school. You know, middle school would be engaging. Obviously, there's a lot of different topics that are covered that they may not have the background knowledge for. And so that didn't take as much storage. The shoes, again, went back to their original owners.
Right.
And then I have like I had so many different materials that I had that I just literally pulled out of a cabinet. So I also kind of, I think when you think of the whole visual of like a concentration camp, you've got wood and brick and metal. So I have a brick backdrop, like a vinyl backdrop that we use for video projects. One of my secret things in doing all of these exhibits is to get kids to check out books because as a librarian, that's my ultimate goal. So we actually have a really large number of books on the Holocaust. We used to do an ELA project where students had to independently read a book about the Holocaust. And so I pulled out that vinyl brick backdrop and put all of those books on display, along with some more wooden crates and, you know, different. I actually have it's kind of a random thing, but I have a perpetual calendar. So I have a couple of them. I don't know why I'm obsessed with calendars in general, but I love using those for historical dates besides just the day of the week. So I had the perpetual calendar out and I had the date of the liberation of the concentration camp. So which is International Holocaust Awareness Day, January 27th. I even looked up which day of the week it was in 1945 when the camps were liberated for the first time. So just small details like that where a student's going to stop and go, it's not January. Why does that say January 27th? And then we can have a conversation and I can lead them to the books that are right there on display. The very next day I had, you know, a line of kids at least a handful of kids that wanted to check out, especially Anne Frank.
Oh, yeah.
A few of the graphic novels like Librarian of Auschwitz. So anything that they saw on display, I would write their names down. And I'm like, hey, the next day you can come back and check these out. We just have to have it out for the exhibit.
Nice. Man,
Yeah.
oh, now you've got my brain spinning in all sorts of directions about museum space with each element like maybe has a little selection of books around it that like provide background or additional oh boy. Oh boy.
Yeah. And it's I just really think anything that gets kids to engage with the topic and then extends it into your collection. And
Yeah.
it's also a great way to know which areas of your collection are in need of expansion as well.
That's a great point too.
We'd expanded that section of our collection, whether it was historical fiction, biography, or history, nonfiction, quite a bit because our students would be required to read. I mean, we were really doing this before the law passed because our ELA department felt it was really important. And then our social studies department has just kind of parlayed into that as well.
That's excellent. So I've got a visual of sort of the general setup and some of the main elements. What are students going to see? Like, how do the students get introduced to this? Is it a class activity? Is it walk me through? What am I going to see?
Yeah, so we talked with the social studies department about how to build that background knowledge. And so 6th, 7th, and 8th grade all took a different topic and approached it in a different way to provide some background before the kids arrived, because some of them have never heard of the Holocaust before, especially like our 6th grade. It's not something they necessarily have been taught before. The law actually applies to grades 6 through 12, which I think is great because, you know, that's at an age at which they're accessing more historical information in social studies versus more like general information that they might get in elementary social studies. So each one of them chose a different topic. One chose like some background knowledge about Nazi Germany. I think that was 6th grade. Then 7th grade chose concentration camps, and 8th grade chose survivor stories. And so it really kind of was the whole, you know, basically as they go through 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, they'll get all that background knowledge. I'm big on having a visual impact when somebody like first walks in my library doors. And so besides, you know, having all the poster sets were out at the tables, and I'd kind of arranged those so it sort of went in chronological order, you know, told a certain story, like it went from, you know, the early days of America's response all the way through survivor stories. So we were really one of the first locations of an Auschwitz memorial exhibit that toured the country. I believe Kansas City was one of the first locations for it.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know where else the exhibit went, but it was here in 2021. Anytime I go to any city, any conference, even if it's just walking around a large city, but especially if there's something locally where I'm going to a museum, I take hundreds of photos because I know in the back of my mind, I'm like, I'm going to be able to use these later. And so
That's
this was
idea.
three years later, you know, I'm like, I can finally use all these photos that I took. So a lot of it included, you know, artifacts that hadn't been seen outside of Europe at the time. And I know, you know, I've had conversations with some other folks, like especially in social studies, when I've talked about this, you know, it's not like the kids aren't there with us. And it's just a picture, it's just a photograph, but it's the closest they're going to sometimes come to having access to that.
Right.
So I printed out around 50 of those photos and then arranged them with the posters. And I also created a banner. I don't know why I like to hang things from my ceiling in my library, but I'm going to do it until the fire marshal says you can't anymore. And every time he comes in, I'm like, hi, how are you? You know, I'm like, let's not. So it's just a thing that I like to have something visually, you know, that's up high to kind of bring your eye to the center of the room. So right in the center of the area that we used, I created, and I'll post this on my link tree as well in Canva. I printed out the letters of the Auschwitz gate, which is the saying over the gate was Arbeit macht frei, which again means work will set you free in German, which is complete lie, you know, to the victims that were going there.
Yeah.
But the kids saw that. They don't know German. And so they're like really questioning, what does this mean? And then the shoes are right underneath that. So they kind of have this whole path that they take through the exhibit. So just visually knowing they had that background information, they walk in, get instructions, and then had around 15 to 20 minutes for class to tour the exhibit.
Wow. So, that's so great. Boy, what a wonderfully immersive learning experience for them.
Yeah.
Because you could cover these topics in class, but going to a different space always reinforces whatever you're talking about. And then having such a wonderfully visual and physical set of displays and props and elements. Great. So great. So wonderful.
Yeah. Well, and we also included multimedia as well. So, a lot of museums you'll go through and have an audio tour. You've got your headphones on. And so we've done that before for the 9/11 Museum. We use the StoryCorps interviews from NPR I love StoryCorps for that kind of exhibit experience. And the National Holocaust Museum has some animated style StoryCorps-esque interviews with different individuals. Like basically reading off letters. There's one from a prisoner of war, which was really fascinating to me when I previewed those. My grandfather was actually a prisoner of war during World War II.
Oh.
And the individual whose story they were reading, they were at the same camp together.
Oh, wow.
So, sometimes you do these projects and you have like this hyper personal connection to it. And you're like,
yeah,
it's so, and sharing that with students as well, like, hey, there's a connection here. So those style of, I love the animation because it's really like a visually engaging piece. I have two TVs that are connected in the library, so the audio was kind of all around them.
Oh,
and
nice.
So we would just play that whole playlist of those interviews, and the kids would stop, watch a little bit of it. I had a few classes where they were so interested, they just sat down and watched, an entire 5 to 6 minute interview before they continued touring the exhibit. So just, again, recreating that experience of here's your headphones, you're going to tour this exhibit, this museum, giving them something that they may never get a chance to see in the real world.
Yeah.
Was really important for our kids.
So, I was fortunate enough. We used to take our 8th graders to Washington for several days on an overnight trip. And when we could, we would go to the Holocaust Museum, and they may still have survivors of the camps that would be there to just talk to. And I had this group of kids, this group of boys that were just rowdy as all get out and just wanted to, be maniacs the whole trip. And we got there and I was just terrified of what they were going to do when we were in this museum. And there was this just little old lady sitting at this little desk, and they went over and they were like, "Why are you here?" And she explained, and they were rapt. Not a peep. So polite, so curious. And she was like just so willing to answer questions. It's really when you can have that sort of getting that first person perspective, that firsthand perspective from someone who actually was there and going through it, and having the animations to engage them as they're going through the museum walk is another great way to just kind of pull them in and make sure that they're seeing things from some different perspectives and in some different modes, some different modalities.
Yeah, definitely.
I've got a technical question for you. You said that they have headphones for when they're doing the walk around. How does that work?
Well, in this case, they don't. We just play the audio through, but It would kind of simulate that for them. Yeah.
Gotcha.
I would love to figure out a way to do that, because then they wouldn't talk to one another, So that might be something I try for next year. We have a great school district foundation that will provide what are called Appleseed grants. And so I would love to have the opportunity to write a grant for one of these exhibits. I've written grants for a lot of different things that we've provided, but and I think there's lots of research out there and lots of prisoners out there. I always think about Andrea Trudeau and Amanda Jones, they do a great presentation on using VR and virtual reality and augmented reality to build that level of empathy with students, because when it's right in front of them, kind of like you mentioned, when they meet someone, when they talk to someone, but when they have that immersive experience, it really does change their perspective on what they think about historical events, especially, or current events too.
Yeah. That'd be a great station too. Boy, I'm never going to actually come up with my own ideas anymore, because everybody is bringing all these awesome ideas, and now I'm like, oh, you could have like a VR station in your gallery walk, and oh boy. And I also love the idea, and this is backtracking a little bit, but I want to make sure I point this one out because I love this. Taking pictures when you go places of museums and displays that you get to see and bringing those back. What a great way to be able to, why reinvent the wheel? Somebody has already figured out how to make this flow, how to make this, what you should include. And it's right there.
Yeah, we have. So I work really closely with another librarian in my school district, Elizabeth Hoskins. And she also does something similar, but with art for ELA, for creative writing. And so she creates an exhibit, like an art gallery in her library once a year. And she does the same thing. She goes to art museums and takes images, pictures, photographs of art, and then has it enlarged. And so a lot of times it's hard for kids to understand scale, I feel like. So,
yes,
like the scale of this painting is floor to ceiling. And so for her to recreate that for students, and then they pick a piece of artwork that resonates with them and write, a short poem or a short story about it. And again, knowing that our kids are at a disadvantage when it comes to travel, when it comes to having those experiences. We have some great local museums as well here in our town. And sometimes they aren't even able to visit those. Like it's only if they go on a field trip in elementary school that they're able to have access to different museum experiences. So even going to art museums, anything that they may not have the chance to go to. I'm a big, I feel like I was born in the middle of nowhere, and I probably should have been in a big city this whole time. But I love walking in big cities and taking all kinds of different photos of different, even landmarks around cities, large buildings around cities, things that you're like, well, I'm going to have this somewhere in my camera roll, and someday it's going to be useful to somebody. So.
And that's the great thing about the digital camera. You just, as many pictures as you need, as many pictures as you want, and they're always there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It is. It's my memory at this point. I don't really need to remember anything. It's got to be somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And I do that with displays too. I take pictures of every display. So like when I did this exhibit, I took probably 40 pictures of, okay, now I know how I'm going to take care of this next year. This is how it's all going to be set up and laid out. Because I'm not going to remember.
Clever. Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a great idea too. I always forget to take pictures of stuff. Like you want the befores, you want the afters. Getting the durings is so important. And I'm so bad at it. But you're right. Even if you're not using them for advocacy, which you should, but even if you're not doing that, just for your own purposes, to be able to reconstruct and not have to start from scratch every time.
Yeah.
Man. So was this the first time that you did this particular museum walk this year?
Yeah, this was our first time doing a Holocaust memorial exhibit. Again, we'd done the Black History Month exhibit, and we'd also done a September 11th memorial. But I feel like this was, for one, it kind of bookends the whole year a little bit. So we had one in like fall, winter, and then spring. So the kids I feel like anytime I do something as a librarian, it's just sort of an expectation, they're like, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do this year? They have like these long memories. And so, which I obviously don't. And so it's kind of like, well, it's like when you do a contest, well, what's the next contest? And with them, it's with our students now, it's like, well, what's the next exhibit? So I need to think through, if there's anything else we can do in regards to an exhibit, because the one nice thing about this, it was a $0 project. Our print shop printed everything in color, laminated it. Everything else was donated or part of our, my collection materials, like my obviously library books, but also all the display materials were just things I had on hand as well. So just being creative with some designs in Canva and finding all those resources through the National Memorial, Holocaust Memorial Museum. We're really lucky that we don't have to pay to print posters and things like that in our district.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And the other great thing was the social studies teacher I worked with really closely, Miss Sansone, invited our administration the day of, just kind of, an afterthought, like, hey, you should come take a look at this. And we invited one of our instructional coaches who specializes in social studies, and they all visited, and it was really interesting to see their reaction to it. They were just as engaged as the students. And so again, the worst anybody can ever say is no. I feel like if you're going to invite somebody and they're busy, they're just not able to make it, that's totally okay. But it was really, really nice of our administrators to be able to visit the library that day. Because I don't always have that opportunity. So invite your admin.
And let them see all the different stuff. That it's not just books. Look at all the stuff that we got going on.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds like, the students clearly love having these exhibits, that they're asking you what's the next one going to be. Have you gotten any feedback particularly about this most recent one, about the Holocaust exhibit?
Yeah, well, especially with middle school, it's always kind of hard to tell how they really. They'll either tell you exactly how they feel or they'll hide how they feel. There's no in between.
Yeah.
So I think one thing is the conversations I had with students after the fact, and during the exhibit as well. But a lot of kids came back the next day and they're like, "Oh, it's gone already." They wanted it to stick around for a while. We just do it for a day or two, because we have to have the library back and functional.
Right.
But for me, I think the biggest piece that showed it was successful were the students that came back to check out books the next day. So I left that component out. I had all my books on display that were pulled for the exhibit. I also had a book list, a visual book list, of course, next to it, to promote those books, and just kind of also helps me figure out, what all I have on that particular topic. But the number of students that were checking out books on the Holocaust and reading more about it and different, I would say, there's obviously a lot of the bigger stories that are told, obviously like Anne Frank. But I think some of those smaller stories that are out there, we have lots of different biographies of different individuals like Irena Sendler, and seeing students engage with those showed that it was, again, I think something that was really successful for them. I think just kids were just asking why, they're like, why is this? Why did this happen? And just making those connections through literature and nonfiction was an outcome that you always hope for. And I was really glad that we were able to achieve that.
Yeah, man. And a great opportunity to highlight those other stories. Because like you said, there are those, the big ones, the big couple that always get mentioned, that always get brought up. But there's such a wide range of different kinds of information. You've got the kinder transport stories, you've got the individual survivor stories. There's just so many different pieces out there that students, I think, would be really fascinated to get into. Clearly, they were fascinated to get into, that they were coming back to ask for them.
Yeah,
that's outstanding. So if somebody wanted to try and, sort of build on this or replicate this, do you have any advice for things that they should be thinking about as they're getting prepared?
Yeah. So I obviously, I think in the school library community, we rely on one another so heavily. We are truly better together. And I think the level of resources that people share online for free is just amazing. So kind of the first time I started with any of these exhibits, my original idea for our September 11th exhibit came from a Facebook group. And so there's a really great Facebook group called it's Library Bulletin Boards and Displays. I always flip-flop it, but it's Library Bulletin Boards and Displays. And then the other group that I'm part of that I get a ton out of is Christina Holtzweiss's group, which is Canva Librarians and Teachers. Join those groups. Just kind of get some ideas from there. Obviously, search, if there's a topic that you're like, I wonder if anybody has signage for this. I wonder if anybody's created this. That's how I started with all of this, was a librarian in the Library Bulletin Boards and Display group. created towers of names of the victims of September 11th.
Wow.
Yeah, and they resemble the Twin Towers. They're color coded. I roll them up in my tiny cabinet every year, and I reuse them, hang them from the ceiling. And that was such an engaging piece for our students because they can walk up to those towers, they can read the names off. They always look for, there's a few younger victims of 9/11. And so seeing them engage with that, and that was something that I didn't have to create from scratch. It was a resource someone put online for free. Joining those groups was really where a lot of this started because, again, somebody could say, well, I'm going to use this in a library display. I'm going to display my books with this particular signage or artifact or whatever it might be. For me, just wrapping my brain around this whole idea of an exhibit. Now, when I'm, again, like I said, when I'm approaching certain things, when I'm approaching displays, I'm like, well, could this be something more interactive? Even things like adding QR codes to videos. If you're not ready to do a full exhibit, put those next to your books, create a little tag on your book list so that students can scan that and they can get more information. And something more interactive. But again, I can't recommend those two Facebook groups more than everything I do. I try and also post on those so that people can share and learn from that as well.
I love the online PLN. I mean, when I can just go and look at what people are sharing, and I may go in with 0 ideas and come out with 1,000 ideas, some of which people are saying, here, just take this and run with it.
Oh, yeah.
And others that will spark you to be like, well, that doesn't quite fit what we're doing, but I can now see a path to this other project. Oh, man, so many great stuff. I am so glad to be a part of this community because it is so, as you said, we're better together and people are so generous, so kind with their materials and ideas and just everything.
Yeah. And my whole desire to share comes out of the fact that, I don't have the budget that I wish I had.
Mm-hmm.
I
think
am
that's
glad,
true for most of us.
I'm glad that I have a budget. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I don't want to have a budget. But there's a lot of disparity sometimes from school to school, from district to district, state to state. And I finally was really open a few years ago when I presented at our state conference, especially, here's how much money I get. I know I had 2 librarians visit my school, and they were there for like a half day. And at the end, they finally said, well, how much money do you have every year? And I'm like, $2,000-ish. And I mean, their jaws dropped. They're like, for everything you're doing? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, and it is, it is what it is. There's just only so much money to go around when it comes to departments, and we're very equitable. We have a per pupil allotment, but I think whenever you stand back and you're like, man, I would really, I'd been in that situation. I would really love to do this, but I can't afford to. And so you've got to rework it, or you got to find a free resource. And so just sharing as much as possible. It's just such a great part of the school library community.
100%. Cannot agree more. All right. This is an amazing lesson. I am very excited that you shared it with us. We are now going to take a 90-degree turn and go into our book break.
Book break. Squiddy!
I love the lessons, but I also love the books. And I am so curious, what book do you think that people should have on their radar? What's something they should read? It can be personal, professional, students, staff, whatever, just for funs. What are you bringing?
Oh my gosh. So I would say the book that probably changed my library. I've had a couple books that have changed my library. And the one that most recently changed my library was Free Lunch by Rex Ogle.
Okay.
I love Rex Ogle's books. And if somebody out there can tell him that, who knows Rex Ogle, I would love to meet Rex Ogle. I follow him online. I swear I'm not a stalker. But I really enjoy Rex's story because, he was a kid that lived in poverty, that dealt with a lot. And so I actually had a 6th grade ELA teacher use Free Lunch as a read aloud for her classes. And it resonated. And I read it too when it was on our Truman Readers Award nominees a few years ago.
Okay.
And I read it one summer. I feel like it was 2019 or 2020. And I was just like, every educator needs to read Free Lunch. So it's about his story. He was in the free lunch line in the 1980s, and grew up at a time when it wasn't, now obviously kids have their student ID numbers and everything else, so it's not as public knowledge, if you're on free and reduced lunch. But for Rex, his story was that he was in a completely divided line. And so everybody knew that you had to go into the free lunch line, and it was hard to make friends if you were in the free lunch line. And he had a friend, a student moved, I believe, into his school and provided him with some comics and kind of changed the trajectory of his life, because he wouldn't have been able to afford to get comic books himself, became, a writer because of what he read. And so I love his books. A lot of his newer books, like Four Eyes, is a graphic novel about his experience getting glasses. And I also like buying his books in English as well as Spanish, so that our ELL students have access to those, because Rex was a Spanish language speaker as well.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I hope I have that fact right. I mean, I do follow him online and I have read his books, but I believe that he was also a bilingual student as well. And so I think that just Rex's books are just great ones to have in your collection. He has, again, some that I think span from upper elementary all the way to high school.
Okay. Funnily enough, Free Lunch was the first book a student requested that I buy for the library, and
really?
I haven't read it yet. It's in my library, but I haven't read it. Every time I walk by it, I'm like, I got to pick that up one of these days. And it's right now, it's on a face out in my nonfiction section.
Oh, great cover too! I love Facing Out, that and Punching Bag. I have those, both of those together. So two of his memoirs. It reminds me a little bit of like Dave Pelzer's story from a child, not in content, but like as far as the structure of it, where it follows him as he gets older. And so like Free Lunch is him in elementary, and then Punching Bag a little bit older. And so his books do follow that chronological order of kind of telling his memoir through stages, but great covers of those books as well.
Yeah, very engaging, very interesting. Well, that's definitely going on my short list. It's coming out of the library this summer, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Melissa, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing not just this amazing lesson, but a great recommendation for a book and just a great bunch of reminders for ways we can make our lives a little bit easier without having to start from scratch every time. So Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve. And thanks for all that you do to keep us connected in the school library community.
Thanks for checking out this episode of the SLLN podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes, which include not only a link to the lesson, but also links to the SLLN website, home to a curated list of free upcoming virtual events and resources for school librarians. It's easy to become a member of the network. Just visit the site and use what you like. If you have an idea, a question, or a lesson you want to share, you can email schoolliblearning@gmail.com. That's school, L-I-B, learning@gmail.com. Know someone with a great school library lesson? Let us know. Until next time, be safe, be good, and be well.